This story will encompass two things that you need to know about. One, the will transmit information to Vladimir. Remember that? What he was transmitting to Vladimir was Obama saying, I'll have more flexibility after the election. Remember that. And then also remember the story that we told you that they're going to transfer the blind sheik. They're going to give the blind sheik back to Egypt. Mark my words, he'll do it after the election. Okay, just remember those two things. Now let's go here. Despite the fact that Congress has refused to allow detainees at Guantanamo to be transferred here into the country, remember that's what he wanted to do, there's now mounting evidence suggesting that's exactly what this administration intends to do after the election. Senator Dianne Feinstein called for a report slated to be released 8 days after the election on the feasibility of holding Guantanamo detainees in U.S. prisons. As the request states, quote, facilities in the United States that are suitable to house Guantanamo detainees might need to be identified, end quote. Transmit information to Vladimir. More flexibility. One such possible facility is the Thompson Correctional Facility in Illinois. Did you know that it was just purchased by the Department of Justice after Congress declined to provide funds? It's an awful lot of activity for an idea that's supposed to be dead. But as the number of detainees has dropped from around 800 to 166, I mean, why would we hold people from the Muslim Brotherhood? They're our friends now. Many now see the closing of Gitmo as inevitable. Former U.S. official has stated to us, many people recognize it's an unsustainable thing, having a 2,000-person task force taking care of a dwindling number of detainees, end quote. Prisoners are already being transferred now, not to the United States, but to our good friends up north in Canada. Back in June, I was up in Canada. I did an interview with the Sun News Network. This is a new network up in Canada that is telling the truth. They are reporting now that the convicted terrorist Omar Khadr has already been transferred up into Canada. He was less than 2 years into an 8-year sentence for killing a Special Forces medic, Christopher Spears, as well as a 15-year-old following a firefight. Joining us now from Ottawa is Brian Lilley. He's a political columnist and the host of Byline on the Sun News Network. First of all, tell us a little bit about this guy. I mean, congratulations. Your good neighbors just gave you a sweetheart guy.
Yeah. Oh, we are so happy with you for sending us Omar Khadr. I mean, this is a guy who comes from a family that's kind of the first family of terrorism for Canada. This man, his father was an Al-Qaeda financier. They had their children born in Canada. They're an Egyptian family originally, moved to Canada, got married here, had the kids, and then headed up back to the Middle East. They ended up living in Pakistan and then in Afghanistan because they didn't like the corrupting influence of Western culture. So this guy's always described as a Canadian, Glenn, but he's a Canadian of convenience who would be brought back for medical treatment through our socialized healthcare system, which you're about to get.
Thank you. And
then they'd flee and go back to Canada or go back to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Before 9/11, they actually moved into Osama bin Laden's compound. This is the environment this kid grew up in. But rather than walking away from it like one of his brothers did, he adopted it completely and engaged in firefights with American soldiers. Could have been Canadian soldiers because our guys were there fighting alongside yours. Okay. So he's shooting against his own country and allies, and that's when he was captured.
But you guys don't want him because you guys can't keep him, right?
No, most likely not. So he was convicted, but just over about 2 years ago now, he was convicted at Gitmo, and the jury wanted to give him 40 years. The Obama administration cut a deal that said, before the jury even said 40 years, they said, we'll give you 8 years, and Canada will take you back after a year, or at least consider the application. We don't really have a choice in this because there's a long-standing agreement between Canada and the U.S. that, you know, citizens of one country doing jail time in the other can be transferred back, but this is generally not for terrorists. I don't think we've transferred a terrorist back and forth before.
Why do you suppose...
So we didn't really have a choice.
Why do you suppose we're doing this? What do you think? Sitting across the border, I have my suspicions, but what is your suspicion? Why is President Obama doing this?
Because he wants to empty Gitmo, and this is part of the way of doing it. Now, the blind sheikh isn't at Gitmo. But I do agree with you that I think the blind shake is going to be next. And the question that Americans need to ask, whether it's State Department or Justice Department, both, the White House, is not will you release the blind shake, but will you engage in a prisoner transfer, which is what Omar Khadr had. Will you engage in a prisoner transfer for him to serve out the rest of his term? And the argument from the Muslim Brotherhood, now running Egypt, is that, well, this guy's in bad health, let him serve out his time here.
Geez.
Funny, that's the argument that was brought forward for the Lockerbie bomber to go back to Libya.
Right.
And what happened to him just after he got back? He was released.
And he was released by the Obama administration. Again, much to the chagrin of the way that whole thing came down, of Ireland. They were lied about by our government.
The Obama administration they put intense pressure on the British government to release him. The Scottish government, he was being held because it crashed into a Scottish field and village and killed people on the ground. They were outraged when they heard about this, but the Obama administration made a deal with the Labour government in Britain at the time, and they forced their hand, and they had him released. So I think the same thing's going to happen with the blind shake.
Brian, what do we look like to you across the border? I mean, we've watched Canadian politics somewhat, not really. Most Americans, you know, quite honestly, we always thought, our dollar, your Canadian dollar is a joke. It's not a joke. I mean, no, it's not a joke at all. You guys seem to be on the right path, although you have your own problems. What are Canadians thinking about us right now, especially with this election coming up?
Outside of the Khadr issue, which, you know, I think Prime Minister Harper's government agreed to, they knew that they didn't have a choice but to take him back eventually, and I think they agreed to the one-year thing as kind of our good friends. The Americans are asking for a favor, we'll do it. That was before Obama kicked Harper in the shins by rejecting the Keystone Pipeline. Right now, economically, you guys look like the drunk at the bar saying, I'm fine, give me another. I'm fine to get home on my own. I can handle all this liquor. Yeah. But you can't. And neither can Europe. You're not as far down the road as Europe yet, but you're on the same road, and you got to pull back. We're trying, brother. We're trying. But if it doesn't work, will you let us across the border? Will you just let some of us across the border? Or are you gonna be racist? Glenn, I got a place for you. I got a place for you because I know you love bunkers. It was designed to house the Canadian government back in the 60s in case of a nuclear war. You can come stay at the Defen bunker with me. You'll be fine. Do I have to? Are there any French people? Are they going to be allowed in? Because if so, I'll take my chances in Texas. Brian, thank you so much. That part of the Ottawa Valley, you're okay. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and good work. Thank you. Good work. Back in just a minute.